Hey, welcome to Branch's Deep Dive Podcast. I'm Timmy. This is Kevin.
Ew.
And Justin.
Hello.
Yeah, welcome, guys. Hey, we're taking a deep dive into this week's content, which is looking at an issue that can't possibly be misconstrued or misunderstood, or no one could possibly take offense to.
No, or manipulate for your own interests.
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's money. We're talking about money. And, one of the things that was in the message and that I think is a common misconception in culture is, there's the time that Jesus is talking in, was it Matthew 11 or 12, or sorry, Luke 11 or 12, where he says that, the root of money the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, right? Is that Jesus saying that, right?
No, Paul in First
Paul.
Timothy.
Sorry, that's Paul.
We're going to read through it, aren't we?
Yeah, that's Paul's. I had those verses mixed up.
Yeah.
So Paul talks about that in 1 Timothy 6. That's what it is. And he says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And people have kind of taken that and said, that money is evil. Money is evil in general. So let's talk about, is money evil? Money evil.
Go ahead, Kev.
Don't fight
Man,
over it.
this is such a deep topic. I feel like I've been in a season for the last 4 or 5 years where I've really wrestled through a lot of this. And no, short answer, money's not evil. Money is just a thing that the Lord can use for whatever he wants to. Our hearts are the things that are wicked, and our desire for the things of the world are where it gets perverted. But the money itself, and there's all kinds of incredible things that happen. I mean, even just the if you're in a community of people who love the Lord, you've heard stories of somebody's rent check, the exact amount showing up in the mailbox, or being able to bless people, or the joy and the glory that gets given to God when he intervenes on someone's behalf to give them the funds that they need for something. Those stories are so powerful and cool. And so sweet that it brings honor to his name. So it obviously can't be a total bad thing. There's too many good stories for it. Super dangerous is maybe where I would call it. But
Yeah. So if it's not evil, then what is it? It's got the potential for evil, because Paul's statement is that the love of money, and people again like to say, well, money is the root of all evil. It's like, no, the love of money is the root of all evil. So I really think money is much more better viewed as like a tool, right? It's just a thing. It's a resource. I think with any resource, we have the ability or the likelihood to turn it into an idol. And I think that's really what Paul's warning against, is making this thing an idol. And also alongside with what Jesus is talking about, and really throughout his ministry, he talks about money a lot. But what he's talking about in the rich fool in Luke 12 is really pointing towards the reality that money has big potential to become an idol. Like maybe more so than other things, other material possessions, because it's a means to which we get more possessions. And so this kind of drive, this love of money is something that we're likely to all encounter, and we're all to be challenged.
we're so good at deceiving ourselves, because there's a level of you need to eat and you work, and there's this basic construct of it. So you can't avoid it, or you can't not participate in it. So it's just sneaky.
Yeah.
Because you can convince yourself that you need, or it's warranted so easily in that razor's edge there.
Maybe it's a little, timely that I just spent, a week talking about the kingdom, riches, and poverty.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that contrast of that is pretty stark from where we're in America to being in Ethiopia.
And for us, I think maybe a better way to frame, when we say is money good or evil, or maybe a way to frame it is what what does the New Testament specifically, and the greater word, how does it speak of riches, and how does it speak of poverty? And because what you said, it's like the problem is us. It's like the law itself. The problem wasn't with the law. The problem was with us. The law was good and perfect and holy, but we are not. And so, same thing with money. Well, I wouldn't say money is good and perfect and holy, but the problem is with us. And if we don't pay attention to what the Bible says about the rich man and the poor man and how God looks at these things. James chapter 2, for instance, he's like, you've dishonored the poor man. He says, let's not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus with partiality. You got, if you say, to the rich man, come and sit in this good place, or to the poor man who comes in filthy clothing, sit over here, he says, you've become judges with evil thoughts. And he goes on to say, has not God chosen the poor man rich in faith to inherit the kingdom? God is he's more concerned about what's going on internally than the fact that you do or don't have money. It's about, are you living by faith, or is your money stealing your walk of faith? And that's a big deal.
Yeah. I think when you said it was the poor man rich in faith, and that is, again, I think on the flip side of, is money the root of all evil, which is the misconception of that scripture. The opposite of that misconception would be that because you're poor, you're somehow elevated or you're somehow generous. But the caveat is that you're poor in funds but rich in faith. And I think that is an important thing that we put on it, because, again, so much of the New Testament, again, it's pointing to us being the problem. It's like us and sin in us. That's the problem. Not that it's the material possession itself. It's the love for that. And what I've seen a lot of times is that not all poor people are generous. I think sometimes we can get this thing that it's like, oh, well, we just need to be poor, and you see a lot of it, especially in maybe different countries, but the United States, there's a lot more of that lately, where it's just like, oh, we just want to blame the rich for everything. And while that very may well be true to an extent, it's not universally true. It's not that the wealth itself makes them evil. I've known plenty of people that are poor, that are greedy, like downright absolutely greedy. I know I grew up with a lot more poor friends than I did rich friends, and some of them were super generous. And that's why I credit my parents were like super generous. I know whenever somebody had a need, even though we didn't have much, they would always give what they had, whether it was a spare room, a meal, money. We would kind of forego pleasure ourselves for the sake of other people. I say we, my parents were the drivers behind that. But I knew people that made, we were lower middle class. I know people that were like middle class or upper middle class that were absolutely like greedy. Like they wouldn't do that. If anybody would dare, threaten what they had, they would do it. And so the point being is that it's not really, doesn't matter. You don't have to be ultra rich or ultra poor or whatever. We all have the potential to be greedy with our money. And
maybe, reading through 1 Timothy 6 all the way through, I mean, honestly, he says a lot there, but it starts off with, servants who are under the yoke, indentured servants, a type of slavery or whatever that context was. He's like, he talks about the disposition. God isn't he's not talking about this disposition is good or bad. Physically, he's talking about your disposition spiritually of humility and submitting to authorities is what God is interested in. And he goes on saying that those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and snares is an important thing, because as I was in Ethiopia, you're talking about people who are very much looking for the opportunity to come to America, to find the American dream, to find the kingdom of heaven, so to speak. I mean, that really is what is being sold by a lot of
that
preachers.
America is the kingdom of heaven?
It may not be spoken of as deliberately or literally as that, but that's exactly what's being taught by all. And now they have access to all of the media, so you really have to just wash. We're coming from a place where we might need to pull ourselves ourselves down because we don't see that the money and the possessions are grabbing a hold of our hearts, whereas they're desiring it. So they're kind of in the position that Paul is speaking of. And actually, what I told them was it's interesting that Paul goes on. He says, "But if those who are rich in this world charge them that they wouldn't trust in uncertain riches." Be ready to give and to store up for themselves a treasure in heaven with the riches. And so Paul kind of speaks as if you do find yourself in this strange position of being rich in this world. For us, that's a very normal position because we have to just understand. We have to understand the difference between those who have never had that opportunity and now those of us who have them. And some of us have found out, man, riches physically ain't what this whole thing's about. It's empty when you really have given yourself to it.
It's 1 Timothy 6:2 that says, "Command those who are rich in this present world," and he goes on to be generous and in deed and with their money and
use it.
We look at that as like as Americans reading that, we're like, oh, well, that's for millionaires, that's for whatever. But if you want to apply it to the context of, okay, no, if you have a roof over your head, according to the people that he's talking about in here, it's like, oh, you're rich. You have a car, you're certainly rich. If you have if you make more than, and I throw these stats out all the time, but it's like, you make more than 10,000 a year, you're richer than like 95% of the population in the world. It's like, oh no, we actually are rich. And I think to us in the United States, it's all this relative thing. But if you want to be relative, you have to be relative to the time that Paul was telling Timothy this in the church of Ephesus in the first century. You want to start comparing it to that. Oh man, you are ultra rich.
Yeah.
And now you start reading it from a place of, oh, this is literally talking about every single American.
It's me.
Yeah. It's me.
It's me.
It's all of us.
It's certainly the three of us sitting here. So
and everybody, I think within branches, congregation in general, it's like, man, we are blessed. And so then I guess it begs the question of like, what do we do with that reality? What do you do with that reality?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I had used,
I don't know.
in the message, I had used, I used the kind of flipping it on its head, where the United States, or most of us, kind of view our money, at least outside the church. This is the common way to view money: is that when I get money, the first thing I'm going to do is spend it, or I'm gonna use it to live. Right, to whatever that involves, me living, and then if I have some left over, I'll save it. Not this isn't true about everybody, but this is kind of for the most part, especially people living paycheck to paycheck, which is probably most people. It's like, I'm going to live, and then if I have some left over, if I have some margin, I'll save for something else that I want to help me live better. And then if we have any, and we get hit at the right spot, then we might give to either a nonprofit organization, or I might give towards kingdom-minded things if I'm a Christian, or I might just give to the needy, the poor, charity, whatever. If at the right time, if it passes those first two filters, if there's any left after that, then I might give. That's the way I see the world commonly views our money stewardship. Whereas the kingdom is a little bit different.
Well, and what I've found the Lord, I think, challenging me on over the years in sometimes brutal fashion because of just my
stubbornness.
Yeah, my some of us might be a little bit more idolatrous than others, right? Shiny, sparkly, the new cars, So what the Lord has done to just challenge me over the years is basically to say, you think that opportunity means permission, but that's just not true. We think that if I have the opportunity to up my, get my brand new shiny sparklies, we have a recyclable culture even with our technology. I mean, my iPad flew off the roof of my car last year.
What was it doing up there?
I don't know. Somebody.
Big dummy left it up there.
Somebody did that, and I was like, man, these things are super cheap and not really a big deal, but most of the world doesn't have access to those things. And so the Lord has just challenged me that, I don't need to buy my new shiny sparklies just because I want to. It's more of a, do I need it? Is it time? Is it what is it going to rob me from my, and Timmy, when you were talking last week, I mean, I think it should hit home for every one of us. Is it robbing me of my spiritual walk? Is my phone time, is my technology? And I think for me the answer is yeah. A lot of times it sure is. And we could just be wiser, do better with our shiny sparklies and what we think is life, and we don't really realize that it's robbing us of our spiritual life that should be our
I think
foundation.
it's an important separation to sit with, that money doesn't go with you. And it's like the cheesy saying that I think you don't really think about it, but money only buys and transacts in things of this world, right? There's nothing that, I shouldn't say nothing, right? Because you can do incredible things and show God's love for people with money, but it is so unimportant compared to the things that matter of the kingdom, right? That the scripture, store up for yourself treasures in heaven, right? Not things on this earth. It's separating. The things in this earth are so irrelevant and they mean nothing. They don't go with you. But if they get in the way of the things of heaven, of the kingdom, of your time with him, the evaluation of what you get from either of those decisions is just so much different. If you have an eternal perspective, if you can focus your eyes and really sit with, like, man, the things that matter are the kingdom. The things that matter are going to be where you spend eternity and what you'll stand before on Judgment Day and have as an accountant, what you'll have learned and how sanctified you'll become in your life, and the things you got to enjoy and experience. Some of the people that I've seen that are very wealthy and manage their money and their relationship to it really well have some of the most incredible encounters with God through what they're doing. Like, it's almost like they get to participate with these really cool scenarios where God just moves and shows up and does cool things. Yeah. Because they've been faithful stewards of, which I know you want to get into stewarding, but they've just been, I don't know, it just almost feels a little bit more like hey, you didn't fall to the temptation of having all the money, you kept it appropriately boxed. Now I'm going to go do something really cool, and you get to come with me to do it. It's almost because like you get to participate in a kingdom thing because you showed, your worthiness and
your faithfulness, your stewardship. Maybe Timmy, just let me read this as you get us. This kind of transitions us, I think, to that as well. He says in Luke 16. He also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. So he said, take your bill sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves. This changed my life years ago. Mm-hmm. He says, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, or other translations say when it fails, when the money fails maybe, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is also unjust in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And therefore, every American realizes that we're under a spiritual, pull of mammon that's trying to get us to live for.
What is mammon?
I knew you were going to say that.
U.S. stablecoin,
version is
USDC.
That's money. It's money.
Well,
it's riches.
Yeah.
Or money. Yeah. So just for the sake of, and I think that's a great, that's such a weird story too. Like he commends the servant for being shrewd. And I think at least part of what that's
for ripping his master off.
Yeah, for ripping his master off. But I think part of what Jesus is trying to, I mean, he goes in and kind of clarify or, finalize it with like, you can't serve both God and money. And I think a lot of what Kevin, what you were saying too, is that it comes down to what does Jesus really care about? And it's like, he cares about people. He cares about people made in the image of God, people who make up his kingdom. And so if we're going to leverage that money for the sake of people, as one of my favorite preachers, who I won't name because it'll trigger Justin, says that, because we're rich, we're also responsible. When we're rich in money, and as Paul's talking about in 1 Timothy 6, he's like, it just makes us responsible to be good stewards with what we've been given, to leverage it for God's kingdom. And again, what does God care about most? It's about people. Yeah. And so we're leveraging it for building his kingdom by way of discipleship, bringing people to Jesus. And I would say those are the things that matter in God's eyes the most.
Is this still Guardrails, or are we in Guardrails?
We're in Guardrails.
Okay, this is great. I'm glad we are.
This is a guardrail.
One of the guardrails that I have, unintentionally, I'll say, it makes it sound like I did this and I didn't, but one of the scriptures that the Spirit always puts in my mind to help me keep in check or remain accountable to is if you see one of your brothers and sisters in need and you have the ability and you don't help them, is the love of God even in you? And that question, that challenge really sits in the back of my mind at times. It feels really heavy, but it is. It's a perfect evaluation of, does my heart align with your heart, Lord? They need help. I have the ability to give that to them. I don't understand your plan entirely. I don't know why you gave me in abundance and why you didn't give them. I don't know if that's a reward of what I've done hard work-wise. I don't even know if it's a good thing or not a good thing. But I do know in this situation, they have need. Yeah. I have means. I love you, and I want to love them more like you. I have to go do this thing now. And it's this that scripture really can be a good handle for the Holy Spirit to pull. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like that one's very pointed, and that there are a lot, you saying your parents even at times of like, we didn't have a ton, but we were still generous to them. That's such a good handle to listen to. If you see somebody who has a need, view them the way that God views them and long to help them. I also think that there's times where we can go tread on what, you say this much better, but we can go tread on what God's trying to walk somebody through and like remove them from their trial that they're being sanctified from. So I think we still have to have discernment in that. That doesn't mean just anybody who has a need, you just go and fix all problems. But
right.
But they're obvious. I mean, I have maybe only had a couple of times where I really had to sit with, like, is this actually a good thing? Should they sit in their suffering or really seek God? And like, most of the time it's obvious. Most of the time it's very clear. Like, yeah, I should help them. Of course I should.
And it is a matter of sometimes of figuring out, well, what is the need?
Yeah.
Because the reality is, I mean, you go through and see homeless people all the time. It's like, totally. Do they need food? Well, not usually. In fact, I mean, there's a lot of programs in which they can be fed, and I've gone down and I've fed homeless people before many times, and generally, at least where I've done in downtown Portland, like, their biggest problem is not that they're starving.
Yeah.
Almost never. A lot of times it has to do with mental illness or drug addiction. It's like, okay, so they have a need that they need to get clean, or they need to get, mental help, or, maybe it's demonic and deliverance is involved. There's lots of different ways. And so I think sometimes as Christians, we can even just look at like, oh, well, we should help via money. And sometimes Christians even think, and that's not always right. In fact, I would say that even looking at the Good Samaritan and that parable, the Good Samaritan didn't just give him money. money. He actually said, like, hey, if anything else comes up, he was very, I guess, generous with his time too. He cared about the outcome, not just throwing some money at a problem, hoping it goes away. So a lot of times
He really inconvenienced himself.
He
right?
really
Yeah.
did.
And his
He went out of his
reputation
way.
and his pride. He
Oh, yeah.
absolutely threw all of his
like,
standing
what are you doing
pride
with
out.
a Jew? Like,
Yeah.
you guys don't connect.
Totally.
And so
the
that
money
whole
was
thing-
probably the minimal side of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It cost him a lot in just maybe his status or whatever. But a lot of times, Christians can look at it this way, or other people can look at it this way too. It's like, in order for me to be Christ-like, it means that I have to vote in this certain way or whatever. And if I do, then I'm being a Christian by telling some government what to do with their money. Therefore, I'm helping people. And I'm like, that whole argument, I'm like, no, you're pawning off, a lot of times, not that you shouldn't be politically involved, but you're pawning off what God's called you to do. It's so much less about, the Good Samaritan, if you're going to go back to that.
It was good, yeah.
It was so much about, someone was looking for a loophole about helping your neighbor. They wanted to know, well, who is my neighbor? And part of what Jesus was telling through this parable was like, your neighbor is the person that shows up in your life, who has a need that you need to help address. And it's the person that's in proximity to you, that's in your life, because so many times we can just be inundated with like, well, it's the person a few blocks away, whether it's literal or figurative. Instead, it's like, no, it's the people that been placed in your life. And if Christians actually took that as like, I just need to address the people that I can affect in my own life, the world would be a way better place. The kingdom would build way
And if
faster.
you just take and evaluate the amount of people you have in front of you, even different seasons, whatever, it's crazy. There's so many. You have so many opportunities to just see that. That's not like physically like, well, you're my neighbor and they're my neighbor. That's where it stops. Like it's so expansive.
And we can get inundated with the amount. And I just think like we got called to, or we have people all the time in Brianna and I's life that we're mentoring a couple that's getting married later this month that I'm doing the ceremony for. And,
nice.
And that's really cool. But I'm like, okay, so once we're done with that, we have one slot, like really realistically in our life, that we can mentor another couple. And so we're looking at, another couple that we can like bring in and mentor, because realistically, like we don't have time in our busy lives to do more than that. But I'm also not going to say because I'm so busy that I'm not going to make time. It's like, no, I do have some time, and I'm going to make sure I leverage that in a way that is addressing the people in my life, because I can't do that for everybody, but I can do it for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that also is kind of, a societal drawback that we have, a disadvantage in, is that now, you look at Providence, Good Sam, Emmanuel,
St. Vincent.
Hospitals.
St. Vincent, the Seventh Day.
Yeah,
all hospitals were at one point meant to glorify God. Now they're not.
Yeah.
They're just. It's not that none of them are doing anything, but that's not.
No,
They're government. They're government. Yeah. So the church has been perfectly happy to say, you take care of that. We'll build the kingdom of I hate to say Satan, but we'll build our little kingdom on earth with our expansion programs and all of these. That's the fact that we aren't. It's kind of off of our radar means all the more Jesus just isn't being glorified. Is Jesus glorified because you have a government that's now giving? You might take examples that are going on right now. Hey, it's really good that our tax money isn't going to all these horrible things, but if our tax money starts going to good things, are we doing it in the name of Jesus? Is he being glorified? Is the gospel furthering? No, we have the responsibility to make our lives fruitful, and this is what Paul says in Titus 3:14, and let our people also learn to maintain good works, to meet urgent needs, that they may not be unfruitful. As you're talking, Kevin, and you're talking. Well, what really is? Not every need is an urgent need, and that's a big deal. As some of us have work with other people groups and stuff. If you treat everything like it's an urgent need, you're creating an expectation that's not healthy, right?
Totally.
But if you're not ready to meet urgent needs, there are urgent needs. And the point that Paul says, that they may not be unfruitful. Honestly, as Americans, I think we really need to challenge ourselves. Do I want to bear fruit on this earth? And I'll go on a tangent if you let me. But Hannah is in First Samuel, you can read, she is a picture of, she wasn't bearing fruit. Her womb was barren. Her husband's other wife was, but the principle is simple. She was desperate. Mm-hmm. It was the will of God that they go forth and multiply on the earth. She was robbed of that. That wasn't happening, and so she was desperate to bear fruit. And she was like, "Give me this fruit, and I'll dedicate him to the Lord." Samuel was the child, and mm-hmm. he changed the whole nation. Mm-hmm. It says God didn't let any of the words of Samuel fall to the ground. He was a great prophet. He mm-hmm. was the one that anointed both King Saul and King David. You can't put a monetary value on his life, and it came through desperation to bear fruit. We have to ask ourselves, do I want to bear fruit on the earth? And if we do, as Americans, there is unbelievable amounts of fruit that we can bear mm-hmm. if we want to. I think because we don't care mm-hmm. and that we're just like, well, God has called me to bless myself and to build, and we just totally miss out. And God he'll let us miss out. But when we stand before him for all of eternity, we're going to want to say, man, I was about your business. There were urgent needs. I went and, they're not readily available to us. So we need to pray for that. We need to be desperate and say, God, when I stand before you, I don't want to be barren and unfruitful. Yeah.
I think that we could get totally off on to, like where your attention goes or what building the kingdom looks like. But since this is specifically on money, one of the things that I think goes hand in hand with that, like desperation or acknowledgement of the value of eternal fruit and doing kingdom work, makes it easier to then sacrifice the things here in this world. And from a very practical point of view, it's a lot harder to hold money in the correct relationship that you should if you're making a ton of bad decisions. If you have lots of credit card debt, if you have vehicles that you shouldn't have, if you have spending habits that you shouldn't have, if you feel justified and entitled to have and indulge in things like eating out and going to fancy restaurants, doing whatever, right? The list could go highbrow to lowbrow. It doesn't matter, right? If you're being financially unwise with spending your money, you're almost chaining yourself or shooting yourself in the foot. And one of the things that I think is really powerful in helping to change those habits and disciplines is having a healthier view of what actually matters. Those satisfactions and those things on this earth don't matter. They're temporal. They are just feeding your selfish desires. And I'm not trying to be like high and mighty, right? Because I absolutely have those same struggles as well. But it's when I wrestle with those, I have to think through, like, this doesn't matter. These things are unnecessary. You don't need these. So to be financially disciplined, to be wise with what you have so that you're ready, so that you're prepared, so that you have positioned yourself to say, God, your kingdom is more important than my satisfaction here on this earth. I've done well with what you've been given, or with what I've been given, feels like a really, really important first step, or a thing that most people don't even consider, definitely don't do. I know very few people who are saying that, we didn't go on vacation. We only have one car for the family. We do these things because we want to just be faithful with what we have. That's not a story you hear, and I think it should be. It should be more important to have the appropriate perspective. Which again, I'm the chief hypocrite in saying all that. But
no, I think it needs to be said. And I love the Proverbs. I said that the first week. Just like read Proverbs. There's so much cool wisdom in there. Like this 15:17 says, it's better to eat vegetables with people that love you than eat meat with those who hate you. And I'm like, to me, that's like, that's so applicable to today. Because even like if the people that hate you are your own family. Ooh. And I think about that from the perspective of, like, I've heard it said a lot. It's like you have to be a dual income, household in order to. And look, everybody has their own story. Everybody's different. Everybody has their own stuff. Like, I get it. But so many people have this, and this is easy for me to speak from a place of someone that owns a house. It's like, well, I got to own a house. I'm like, well, no, you don't. Most of the world doesn't. Like, we don't, you don't have to. And I have to have this car. Well, no, you don't. Like, you don't have to have this car. No, you don't. And so we put these things on us. Our culture puts them on, and we go with them to the point where it's like, oh. And I've been at places in my life. I remember when my wife and I were both working a lot. It's like we ate really good because we had a lot of money, and the more important thing is we didn't have a lot of time. So we didn't have time to prepare our own food. So we ate out, several times a week because that's all we had time for. And it's like, well, why not? We have the money. I'm going to go eat lunch out too because I don't have the time. I have the money because we're both working. And then once we had a kid, and we're like, shoot. Why are we like paying for someone else to raise our kid by busting our tails? And we really felt convicted, like maybe God doesn't want me to just make all this money, and instead He'd rather have me be a good parent. And I can't do that while we're both working full time. And so for me, that meant, partially for me, I was like, I had to go make more money so my wife could quit her job because she made way more money than I did. And we're gonna have to we made the sacrifice. And I look back and we sold our dream home. We sold some cars. We kind of gave up a lot of the trips and stuff that we were going on so that we could invest in our kids. And by no means have we done any of this perfect, but I look back and I'm like, man, that was a wise decision. And that's us, eating vegetables with, so to speak, with people that we love, than eating meat with those that hate us. Yeah. And I'm like, man, and the lie of culture will tell you, no, you want meat. Meat is what's going to make you happy. And I'm like, but if the people you're eating meat with hate you because, you've driven yourself into the ground and you don't have a relationship with your kids or your spouse because you're working yourself to death because culture tells you to do that, like, man, we're probably doing it wrong at that point. And so...
I think this, and we talked about a couple of weeks ago about the wisdom of counsel and people around you and having older people. There's so much financial nuggets that older people throw to younger people that just get ignored, that it seems obvious, or it seems like so... Well, I guess one of the things I was thinking of is that I'm really grateful for in the same way, that's just listening to the wisdom of people ahead of you and saying, I'll hear that and I'll take it and I'll go do it because I trust you and I've seen the fruit in your life, and I'll just say that you're in proximity to me and I'll follow what you have to say, because I can't quite see it clearly yet, that submission to other people around them. My parents said when Elizabeth and I got married, hey, live off of your income alone. Even if you have a second one, it's great. So much harder to pull backwards than it is to have just gone without. So if you ever want to get to a place where you can have a stay-at-home mom and you don't have to have two jobs, don't ever let yourself drift to depending on those two incomes. Now, that was an incredible thing. We did that, and it made our life way easier when that time came to make the choice, because we hadn't drifted to become comfortable on two incomes. But that's just the outcome is the same. Either tear it out and go backwards and it's more painful, or prepare for the thing ahead of time and you can still have the same choice. But I think a lot of people get into the situation where they don't want to do the tear it out. They don't want to do this is going to suck and we're going to have to go down to one cup. This is the funniest, most obvious one, is you don't need two vehicles. There are plenty of families who get by with one vehicle, who share. You can make it happen. It's
inconvenient, but...
Totally is. You can ride a bike. You can get rides. You can make it happen. Absolutely. Yeah. Right? And there is total wisdom in, if you have little kids, you don't want to leave mom at home with little kids without a car in case an emergency happens. But you can also cover that. There are plenty of people who can be on standby for calls. Like, you can figure it out. Or you can buy a cheap car and you can commute in a car that's going to break down on you. It's not about imposing infliction upon yourself or making it hard, but it is just making wiser decisions. And I think that there's, Justin, you correct me if you disagree with this, but
he will.
Or you challenge me if you disagree, I guess. I think that there's,
Can we have an
in
argument?
the same way that we were talking about this last week with sexual sin, there's a huge element of money that I think is God saying, I want to protect you from yourself, even in this world. I know so many people who live under a gray cloud, young couples that get married and they just bring tons of debt and they're burdened and they have this tension in their marriage that's so heavy and so real that they're blind to. And it's just because they're dumb with their money. They make such bad decisions. They want to satisfy themselves. And so they have this cloud that makes being married is so difficult when you first get started. And now you've made it that much more difficult simply because you're bad with your finances.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, even on the other end of the spectrum, right? That's all a lot of like lack of money or how foolish you are with it. But people who have a lot of money and live under this pressure of, I know this one guy I'm thinking of, his whole family is massively wealthy, doctors and whatever, and all these things, and entrepreneurs, business, real estate, all of it. And he lives in this place where he's built an extremely successful business, making a ton of money, and he's the black sheep of the family because it's not enough. It's not a big enough business. So his brother did 3 of those by the time that he did 1 of them, and his sister did that and is a doctor. And you're like, the amount of weight and crippling out of just turmoil inside of us that money can bring in this world is something I think that God wants us to avoid while we're here. I think money is such a kingdom, such an eternal thing in how we choose to give our attention. But I think that there's a wisdom element of how we navigate our time here and a peace of mind, and even just our own ability to sit and be more calm and be at rest more because we don't go indulge in these traps that are really, really damaging.
I feel like in some ways money, I'm just thinking about it more and more, and this kind of occurred to me, that money almost isn't even a wisdom thing. I mean, it's wisdom in the way that we handle it, but it really is, it's math. Like for the most part, it's math. And so like the fact that we would accidentally overspend doesn't make any sense.
Totally.
It's like you're either knowing what you're spending or you're not.
Yeah.
And if you're spending too much, then you don't realize that. It's weird that in our culture that's even a thing, with credit cards and stuff like that. It's like you usually can't do that if you're just dealing in cash, and that's probably why Dave Ramsey's so successful and all that. But it's like you either have it or you don't. And in our culture, it's very much like, it's kind of a gray area. It's like I can spend more than I have, and obviously wisdom would tell you like, well, don't do that.
Yeah.
And it's weird that we'd get in places where it's like, we overspent. And granted, there's things in life that can hit us, illnesses and accidents and all that kind of stuff. But I would say most of the time it's not that's driving our money problems. Most of the time it's like you said, it's irresponsibility, it's not understanding, or it's simply just not caring, or being impulsive and feeling like we have to, and we put all these have tos on us that really aren't, and then we shoot ourselves in the foot. It's just the same old game over and over.
The root of the problem is that we are treating this world as it's our home. That's the root of our problem, is that we're loving our lives so much that we would shrink back from any kind of death ever. Revelation 12, they overcame Satan by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives so much as to shrink back from death. We live in the exact opposite reality, and we've Christianized our non-Christian culture, or our anti-Jesus culture, and the things that he cares about, we think are, it's like Isaiah 53. Surely we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted, but he was wounded for our transgressions. The way we looked at Jesus was, man, this guy's cursed. The reality is he was the Son of God, and the blessings that we have spiritually came from him. And what we've done is we've just physicalized all the spiritual blessings and whitewashed the dangers of the flesh into the blessing of the Lord, the blessing of the Lord. Meanwhile, our faith is totally shipwrecked. We're not fruitful. We don't care about the kingdom. We're completely distracted. And Paul says this, I'll just pull one verse out of 1 Corinthians 7. He says, "This I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you, but for what is proper, and that you may serve the Lord without distraction. You know, as Paul is telling them, hey, you may want to take your life in this direction or that direction. He's like, I'm not trying to put a leash on you, like to control you, but do you understand that you know your life? I think to your point is that your life is so easily distracted and maybe not totally shipwrecked, but unfruitful. And the point that you know you can be a saved soul in wasted life, and you can stand before the Lord and say, yeah, I could have, but
I need a boat.
You're never gonna you know, say this little, you know, dash between two dots, which is our being born and our life and our death. Oh man, this little dash compared to eternity, but I just really had to enjoy, you know, life more to the extent that we're not concerned about what belongs to Jesus. And Philippians 2, Paul says, Timothy is like-minded. He's like, because nobody cares about the things that belong to Jesus Christ. Everybody cares about their own things. And that's the story of our life. Yeah. We have to now pull ourselves out of that.
Yeah, and even again, for non-Jesus people, there's just, this applies to everyone, but non-Jesus people included. Like Kevin said, there's such a wisdom to this. When my wife worked in hospice, there was so many instances. Like this was almost every time there'd be some sort of family tension as someone's passing away. And there would be this common theme where they were just like, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. Yeah. I wish I wouldn't have worked so much. I wish I wouldn't. And I just look at that. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, why don't we hear those stories more in culture? It doesn't speak to the narrative. It so flies in the face. And these aren't Christians for the most part that are passing away, but they're realizing, oh man, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids. I wish I would have been a better grandparent or a better parent. It's never like, man, I wish I would have worked more overtime. I wish I would have made more money. I wish I would have had a bigger, because at that point, your money and your stuff, I mean, that's what the rich fool is pointing out. It's like, you can't take it with you. He's like, your life is going to be demanded of you this very night. And then what's going to happen to your possessions? Well, your possessions, they're not with you. You're in a place that's not even your home. And you're frail and you're not able to do anything for yourself. And what you have, you had everything backwards for the most part. And they realize this. And I'm like, what if we realized this before we were in hospice? Yeah. Like if we realized it now, if young people realized it. And I want to get to like, how is it that we actually go about realizing that? And I really believe that Jesus' upside down kingdom really introduces this thing in a different way. You should read Luke 12 as well. And I think he's, we will get to that. But I think what he's pointing at is that we actually need to reorder, rather than it being like with our money, we live, save, and then we give, that we actually need to give, save, and then live. Like it's a complete reversal of the way that we view our money and our resources. So we should give, save, live.
I was just going to say that exact thing of just like forcing your heart to get back in line, right? It's a guardrail. Giving is the thing that says like, I recognize that this world doesn't matter. I recognize that this is all your resource. I recognize that this all came from you. This is me forcing myself back in alignment to that.
Yeah. And it really is just such a practical guardrail. I think that's why we put the give part first. Nobody wants to do that, but I see it as a guardrail against greed. If Paul's warning, Jesus' warning in Luke 12, Paul's warning in 1 Timothy 6, like greed is this big problem that those who are rich has to deal with it. As Americans, we got to realize that we are rich and we have to be careful for greed, because Paul in 1 Timothy 6, he says, but the people who long to be rich fall into temptation. So there's one bad thing. And they're trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. He's not just saying this might make your life difficult. He's like, no, this is of the utmost importance. Plunge your life into ruin and destruction. Think about that for a second. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people craving money have wandered from the true faith. In other words, it has like this faith destructive tendency too with greed, and pierce themselves with many sorrows. I mean, he just goes into like 4 or 5 things that are like the worst possible things you can think of. And he's like, this isn't from you sleeping around. This isn't from you doing these things that maybe are more noticeable, that you're not murdering people, you're not hurting people, but this is something that is a heart issue that can destroy your life.
I think the root of it is my will, not your will.
Yeah.
Right? The root of that is, and chasing that money is, I want what I want,
security.
My way. I'll take care of it. I've got me. I don't need you. And I want it my way. And that it's, I think, really the piercing and the imagery of that, I think in our world in America is so tricky to see at times because it is praised from the world's point of view at times. Being pierced, if you are a follower of Jesus, might look like being praised in the world. Really hard.
You know what
to
else?
see.
Sorry to this just it seems really important enough to interrupt. No, I was just thinking, as our family sold their company, and people got some money out. What was really interesting was it was decided by my mom to give distributions and to be super generous where she didn't have to. It was just could have been all locked up and whatever. But what's really crazy is that almost immediately it was like everybody had either spent. It's like they were like, well, I need more. I bought the beach house. I bought now I need.
Yeah.
And they began, I want to be careful, but it was almost like because the giver was so generous, you started despising the giver and being like, now you owe me.
Yeah.
What are you doing with all that? And I think we do that to God when we're like, when he's so generous and we have such an abundance. It was said one time that covetousness isn't for people in poverty. It's for people who have been given so much that they can't stop thinking about what they could do with more.
Yeah.
It's just that's the disease, is we just start dreaming about, well, I've got this. Well, what else could I do? What else?
Yeah.
I even find it trying to, put lipstick on this, manufactured.
The Taj Mahal.
Because you're just like, well, I could do this, I could do that. And, of course people were like, well, you're going to tear down that thing and build something different. I'm like, nope, because I know myself. Once I allow myself a long leash, it's over. If we're in control of our lives, then all of these things begin. I think you made mention. Are we being spirit led? And the answer for all of us is sometimes. I think, because we just
Not
drift
enough,
by
not as much
by
as I
nature.
should.
We're going to
Yeah.
drift.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not we're super disciplined and we just understand who we are and who our personal tendencies are, because not everybody is going to fall to lust. Not everybody's going to fall to greed. Some people are going to fall to anger and, just jealousy and whatever. But we need to know what the Lord sees as riches. And God just sees riches in a way that we don't, and we'll get to that in a minute. But
I think the wandering is to your purpose of that, getting away from you, you just get lost in this. And I think that word wander is so good because it's this slow, accidental. You think you're going to be fine, and then you realize, I went too far, and you got there.
Yeah. And Jesus is talking about this. You wanted to get to this Luke 12. I'm just going to summarize it. But it's kind of interesting that someone comes up to him and it's like, he's asking him a legal question, like, tell my brother to divide his estate, our father's estate with me. It's like a weird question to ask Jesus. They're like, some things. and it's probably a younger brother telling his older brother if you're the firstborn, you get the lion's share of the money in that culture. And so he's probably wanting it to be more fair in his eyes or whatever. But Jesus is like, friend, who made me the judge over you to decide such things as that? And then he goes into this teaching about money. He says, guard against any kind of greed. That's the first thing he says about it. Yeah. The first thing he says in response to is be careful. This has the ability, just like Paul was saying, to ruin your life. He says life is not measured by how much you own. And then he tells him a story. I guess I'm going to read this. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, what should I do? I don't have any room for all my crops, he said. I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, he says, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for? And that's just like the old tale. I mean, it's so common. And he says, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have rich relationship with God. And again, it's this opposing reality that we don't understand. He's like, the real richness in life doesn't come from what you own. It comes from who you serve and who you trust in. And if your riches have the potential to be your security, to be your idol, whereas God should be your security. And I mean, I would just tell anybody who's listening, man, if you're really honest with yourself, like, what is your security? And he goes on, Jesus goes on, and he says later in that chapter, he says, seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything that you need. Mm-hmm. In other words, like, are you depending on me, or are you depending on your own riches? And it's a sobering reality that we all have to come to terms with. Are we trusting in our money? Or are we trusting in riches?
But that's a huge statement. Like, the statement that Jesus says, "Who made me a judge and arbiter over you?" Just think about that, because what does Jesus say? God causes it to rain on the just and the unjust. He does good to the evil and to the righteous. We think that God has designed everything in our lives so that we're the head and not the tail, the lender and not the borrower. That's what the old covenant, those were promises. Mm-hmm. Jesus now says, "Who made me a judge and an arbiter over you?" But you need to pay attention to what's going on inside. See, this is just a very different than the law statement. Mm-hmm. I'm not concerned primarily about your concerns physically. I'm concerned about what's going on inside, and your desire is what I'm concerned about, not how prosperous and blessed you are. That's just a crazy anti-prosperity gospel statement.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, I think about it too. It's like, the three of us were not immigrants or anything close to them, which means, like, none of us chose to be here. Like, to be born, the fact that we're born into like that weird place of privilege of just being, like, born in the United States. It's like, you and I, we had nothing to do with it, like, literally nothing. And I think sometimes, like, I could have been born. In fact, I had a way better likelihood of being born in Asia or somewhere else, like, just because there's way more people there. And so when I think about it, it's like, again, during my message, I talked so much about just this idea that once we have wealth, it's so hard to get rid of. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to give away. And I share the story. I mean, there's so many stories like this. I remember one time I got, like, an accidental deposit in my bank account when I was young, and I didn't have a great job or anything like that. It was like $1,000. It showed up in my account. And I was like, sweet. Like, where'd that come from? Well, maybe it was like the IRS or like something like a tax refund or something, I thought. And then I got a call from the bank, like, the next day. They're like, "Sorry, we made this thing in error and we're withdrawing it." I'm like, "No, you're not. That's my money." Like, that's literally what came out. Yeah. That's why it was my money. Yeah, good luck taking it from me. It was like, it was crazy. That's just the reality of when something is ours, whether or not we did anything for it. Yeah, good luck prying that out of my cold, dead hands, Well, It's like, yeah, right.
Well, and here's the thing is, you take that a step further. We don't get to decide who we were born to. Jesus did. Could have been born under the Roman Empire, a rich family. Could have been born in our day. Could have been born in the time of microchips and cell phones and big screen TVs. Could have been born anywhere, and he decided to be born not in Jerusalem, not to the, but in Bethlehem, and then lived in Nazareth, where even a Galilean says, his disciple, is it Nathaniel, he says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" This is the God we serve. He doesn't just teach us humility. He is the epitome of humility and holiness and righteousness and love. But he decided to be born, in obscurity and not, and that's why, again, these aren't just like, let's tell other people how to use their money. It's, who is Jesus? This is a who is Jesus question. And I spent, a couple of days unpacking that. Who is this Jesus? Because the problem is we think Jesus is somebody he isn't. Mm-hmm. We think that Jesus existed to bless himself in the way that we think he exists to bless us, right? He says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Mm-hmm. And the way he served wasn't that he was waiting on tables. The way he served was to wash us by the water of the word, and to to heal, and to take our greatest needs. Not he didn't ever come and just say, I'm going to bless you with 1,000 cattle. And we see him doing that in Jacob's life and so on. So it's not that that's outside of his purview, but the primary example of who Jesus is somebody who came from heaven, emptied himself, became obedient to death, even the death on the cross. And then Paul in Philippians 3 picks that up and is like, I was a Hebrew of the Hebrews. I was great. And the epitome of high society in my culture, in the Jewish culture. And he's like, I've suffered the loss of all things for Christ. So that's the identity statement of who Jesus is. If anyone wants to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. But Peter in Matthew 16 is like, not so, Lord. You won't have to go to the cross. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, because you don't have the things of God in mind, but the things of men. So there's this defining foundational spirit that we're learning about, and it has a lot to do with what we think prosperity is financially and physically versus spiritually.
Yeah, well, I mean that's his upside down kingdom, right? In Matthew 5, he's going through and saying, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, and all this stuff. And you read that, and you're like, no. It's like the important people are the ones that are blessed. The ones who have a lot are blessed. Like, what? You can't say that. And Jesus is like, no. It's like this is opposite quite from what you think and how you view wealth and success and all this stuff. It's quite contrary to so much of what we see and what we believe. And that's why I think it's so important when it comes to our stewardship of resources and this is true about not just about money, but maybe that's because we're talking about, but to give first, to save second, to live last. And in that we kind of view our money as a discipline, or we discipline our money so it doesn't discipline us, which it will. And so we do this to protect against greed, to protect against, instead of saying this is mine, I'm going to give it first to God, and then what I have left over, then I'll let that fall where it falls. And I think it's so important that we view money in that way.
Yeah. I think there's self-evaluation and searching your own heart and constantly coming back to sitting with that is so important. Yeah. Because it's so sneaky that for us to indulge ourselves and live for ourselves here is so sneaky.
It's sneaky, and it's even once we get past the sneakiness and we really are introspective, we start looking at our finances, looking at our heart towards our finances, it's deceitful. It's slippery. It's like you start trying to push that and you'll have a million reasons not to do it. And I've heard these stories over and over again, and I've had opportunities, and by no means have I ever got this perfect, but man, we like I said earlier, like we gave up a lot when my wife stopped working, and I don't regret it for a second. Yeah. And looking before, like you said, it's easier to not have in the first place. That's what we give first than it is to take it away once you have it. And it was hard, man. There was a million reasons not to do it. But looking back, I'm like, that's one of the best decisions we ever made. And we were fools to think that this wouldn't work out somehow, that God wouldn't provide. We seek His kingdom first, and He'll give us everything that we need over and over again. I remember I'm going to share this in the message, but we essentially gave away a car. We still owed some money on it, but I mean, it was like a $58,000. That's what it was worth in Hawaii, a Suburban, and we owed $30,000 on it. Said, hey, you guys can have it for $30,000. That's what we want to pay off the loan. And so it's like we essentially gave that much equity in a vehicle to somebody. And I remember thinking, I'm like, we can't afford to do that, because in our mind we actually brought it over to Hawaii so that we could sell it for more, because we knew it was worth more over there. Profit, and we met this young couple and that were missionaries, and we're like, man, we could bless their socks off. And it's like we did that, and this is a whole nother thing we're not going to get into today, but I'm just going to leave it at this. But we did that. And it's like over the next 2 months, our business blew up coming out of COVID. And it's like we got more than we had given away. And I've seen time and time again in life, it's not always like that, but I've just seen God be faithful over and over again when it comes to the financial realm, when we've gone and uncomfortably gave to the point where I'm like, I love this. I can't wait to involve my kids more and just giving and seeing, like, even if it's
hugely fulfilling.
Oh, yeah. And then that's the thing. Even if it doesn't come back around on a financial thing right away, which oftentimes I've seen it has, it's always fulfilling. Like we gave up a lot. I mean, we're making a third of what we were when Brianna and I were both working now, but what we've gained in our family and all that stuff, like you can't put a price tag
can't
on
monetize
that.
it.
And I'm like so grateful that we made that sacrifice. It's not even a sacrifice anymore. I'm like, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Totally. Yeah.
Let me put a stamp on that real quick.
Put a stamp on it.
Paul says in Romans 15:25, but now I'm going to Jerusalem to minister to the saints, for it pleased those from Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor among the saints who are in Jerusalem. It pleased them indeed, and they are their debtors, for if the Gentiles have been partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister to them in material things. Therefore, when I have performed this and have sealed to them this fruit, I shall go by way of you to Spain. So there you have Paul says the physical things are in comparison just far less than the spiritual things. If you're blessed spiritually by something, then you need to consider that your monetary giving, whether it's to church or whether it's to missions, is just a drop in the bucket. You've done very little in comparison to having some spiritual blessing. And again, he says, when I have sealed to them this fruit. So Paul's mentality is that he even says, I think, to the Philippians, he's like, not that I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that abounds to your account. So there's our motivation. People really don't like when I say our motivation maybe shouldn't be treasures in heaven. That doesn't seem to be true in Paul's mind. Like he's like, you get to sow eternal fruit while you're in this life, and that's a huge deal. Jesus said, "A cup of cold water given in the name of a disciple will not be without its reward." And to take that's faith. That's faith. That's giving something now to receive something later. That's faith. It's good. It's not that we shouldn't be motivated by love and compassion. Those are all things that Jesus, Jesus says, he looked on them having compassion, and but faith. Galatians 5 verse 6 says, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith expressing itself through love. So a healthy faith is expressing itself through action of love. To your point from 1 John, how can I say that the love of God is in me when I see my brother destitute and don't give him things that are needful for the body?
I've thought about that a lot. Like, what does store up treasures in heaven mean? It doesn't mean just spend money on new cars, spend money on Bibles for missionaries, and it's a one-to-one. That's obviously not it, right? But how do you actually go store those? How do you invest in the relationships or whatever? And that's, for me at least, that's been a really sweet time sitting with that for a while with the Lord. Like, what actually does that look like? What in my life looks like storing up in eternity, building your kingdom, bringing honor to you? Like, what do those look like? To really sit and think through that is.
We even Jesus do that. We all get to that place where we contemplate that regularly.
Well, and I don't need to compete with Timmy. Jesus said, "You receive a righteous man in the name of a righteous man, receive his reward. Receive a prophet in the name of a prophet, receive his reward." Mm-hmm. So I can receive Timmy and be like, I get a pastor. I get a pastor.
There you go.
But seriously, I mean, those are principles we should know. Like we're not in competition. We're in. Am I submitting to who God is putting in my life to challenge me, to encourage me to speak truth in my mess sometimes? And if I do, then we're one. And
totally.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Kevin, would you pray for us as we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. God, thank you that you are good. That you are full of unending mercy and faithfulness to us as we walk down on this earth and try to seek you and to align our lives to look like your example that you gave for us. God, help us to always turn back to your word for the truth that you've given to us, to always be soft and listening to your spirit to guide us. God, we would have your eyes to see the world the way that you see it, to see treasures in this world the way that you see them. God, to see where there is value to spend our time and our money and our resources for your kingdom. God, and help us to have soft hearts to love those around us, to to give that cup of cold water, to respond and be obedient when those things come into our lives. God, we ask that this brings glory to your name, and we thank you for this time. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, be encouraged, be challenged today. Thank you for joining us on Branch's Deep Dive Podcast. We will see you in groups throughout the week and next time here.